Maybe I need to find my own inspiration. But am I ever going to find it? Is it worth all the trouble? Kiki's Delivery Service.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Holt.
And I'm Lee Esses. And Kiki's Delivery Service was the third of the Studio Ghibli movies that I've seen. But I will say that Kiki's Delivery Service, not my favorite of the set I've seen so far. I'm sorry. It felt like a babysitter's club.
This one is definitely geared towards a younger audience, towards an audience that is trying to figure out who they are and what they want to do and how they're going to navigate the world. Especially if you're looking to write a cozy or low stakes kind of story. Studio Ghibli in general is a good source of inspiration for those. While Lee may not have enjoyed it, and this certainly isn't my favorite Studio Ghibli movie, it is a good representation of this kind of genre, this kind of story, if that's what you're looking to write. So let's take a look first at our characters. The names are interesting because you have this weird mix of a very Japanese influence, but you have some other names that are more Western influenced. And I think that's a good representation of the location that the character is in at the time, the main character, Kiki.
One of the things that stood out to me as far as the naming of the characters is Ursula. When you hear that name, there's a very particular kind of image that comes up. And yes, that probably has to do with Little Mermaid, which I believe came out after this. But it's not generally imagined as this young, pretty, inspirational, heartwarming type character. Ursula is the old hag who lives in the woods. So I thought that was an interesting choice as far as naming the characters.
And then you have some names that are very similar. I think this is more indicative of the Japanese origin of the story because otherwise we would not encourage having names so similar like Kiki and Gigi. That's the main character and her cat. And then you have Kokiri, which is also still very similar.
They all look very similar on the page, and I know that's not true of all Japanese names by any stretch of the imagination. But having all of these characters so tightly interwoven in a written form would be a lot more difficult to pull off than it was in this case on a film format.
So obviously our main character of the story is Kiki. The whole movie is named for her. It's Kiki's Delivery Service. She's the one that has the main story plot arc, the person who goes through what is essentially a hero's journey for her story.
That might be a little generous. She goes through the internal part of the hero's journey, not necessarily the external. She doesn't really have a villain per se, but she has a lot of that self-questioning and the maturing that comes with the internal part of the hero's journey.
And there's still a little bit of the external of going out and having to leave the safe comfort of her home kind of thing.
So the literal physical relocation, yes, I will give you that.
So there's some elements, but again, this is the cozy take on a hero's journey.
As far as dialogue and word choice, I thought it was a good representation of the different ranks with different people and how they treated each other with respect, or the demanding get out of the way. It was all very clear where everyone fell across the board. And even the character herself was very clear about the people that she saw as peers and the people that she saw as a higher standing socially than her. These kinds of dynamics between the characters was very clear across the story.
And that's a lot of where some of her insecurities really fit in there. Part of her character arc was dealing with those insecurities when she encountered peers who were a higher class in the culture than her. Of course, this is a difficult thing to really break down the dialogue, the specific word choices, because there is a translation involved here. So we're not going to focus a ton on that part. So let's get into the actual structure, the plot of this story, and what makes it so interesting in the world of a cozy coming-of-age story.
One of those signatures of the coming of age is that it starts and ends more or less in the same external circumstances, but the perspective of that main character is changed. She started off in the story knowing how to fly, and then she ended with her ability to fly, and that was her success. She still was living. Now she had a business that she was trying to get off the ground, and that was going to be the next adventure. It's not necessarily an old world order, new world order type of setup. It's a perspective change, which is very common for that middle grade group.
See, it's the middle grade hero's journey, where no, there's not a new world order, but it's the internal perspective that is completely changed. Kiki's Delivery Service has a really good structure for a kids movie. It has those low stakes with a touch of magic. The main character is about 13 years old, and it's a really good story for that age group to really feel connected with, because especially that 13-year-old age group, they are struggling figuring out who they are because they're getting into puberty. They're getting into being a teenager and learning a lot more. There's a lot of self-discovery. It's a rough time. No one wants to be around them. They don't even want to be around themselves. And it's really well represented in this. The structure is all based around her learning herself again. It's that self-discovery journey where she leaves home, finds a new life, and has to accept herself within those circumstances.
When we're talking about structure, I feel like this one is very middle of the road as far as how long it took to get to the inciting action of her leaving home and the comfortable amount of happily ever after at the end. In these types of stories, that Act 2 tends to be shrunk just a little bit, where you tend to have a whole bunch at the beginning and a whole bunch at the end. In this case, I feel like it was a comfortable amount on both sides, but it was not definitely long in either direction.
The world building, I think this is where Studio Ghibli really shines, is in their world building. Because it's never the same as our world. There's definitely some inspiration. There's definitely connections to it. But they do such a wonderful job of introducing the magic in a seamless way that there's no questioning it. Her whole purpose is to go find a town where she can establish her work and figure out who she is as a witch. And when she gets to a town, most of the people there are surprised because they haven't had a witch in a long time. They are way more focused on technology, which sends her kind of into a mini existential crisis because technology is serving the role that her magic should have in smaller places.
And I think it was an interesting element to have the characters react to witchcraft, because the parents are like, yeah, this is a normal everyday thing. Having the other people who can also fly on brooms at the beginning and making her feel small about her witchcraft. And not because it's this ostracized thing from society, but because the main character might not feel as pretty as these other people when performing the witchcraft. She goes into a town without witches and they're like, cool, thumbs up, have fun. The reaction to witches throughout the story tells us a lot about the world that they're in, because it differs from the expectation.
And for how they present all of this magical elements, all the world building that they need to that differs from our world, they do this almost immediately. They're on the verge of starting with backstory, with the mom and daughter talking about how it's nearly the full moon and it's time for the 13-year-old to leave and start a business and get out into the world. So there's a lot of like, wait, whoa, what's happening? 13? Really? Okay, that's weird. But it's done so naturally that you just kind of go, okay, I guess, and just move on.
I feel like this is an indicator that I'm old, because 13-year-old me would have been like, yeah, that makes sense.
Same.
And now 30-some-odd-year-old me is going, 13's kind of young for that. So this might be a target audience discussion more than a world building discussion, but it's definitely deeply involved both ways.
Yeah, but then they do a really good job of slowly evolving the magic system and slowly discovering it as the main character herself is rediscovering it and rediscovering the confidence it takes to really carry out her magic. and in particularly to fly after she lost the confidence for it.
I also like how they likened the magic to art. They had that scene where they're talking about, I feel like I've lost my magic. Yeah, there are times when I feel like I don't have access to my art also. This is part of the journey. This is a great opportunity to reconnect with why you want to do this in the first place. So I feel like as storytellers, this kind of hits home a little bit. It was a nice thing to hear in a way that we haven't always seen before.
So the types of stories that you can really take this one and apply it to would be especially your children's stories, your middle grade. You can take some of the structure of it, some of the plot points, and apply it to any sort of cozy story. I know that Studio Ghibli in general is a huge inspiration in the cozy genre, but it will be something that is a lot more low stakes, and for the character arc, it is going to be something targeted to a younger age just because of that coming of age, discovery of self kind of story.
Your homework for next time is a very similar movie. It has a lot of the same target audience and plot lines. We were talking about Jaws.
Yeah,
In case that wasn't clear, I was being facetious there.
So very similar. If you look at it from the story of the shark, from the shark's perspective, sure, she is on a journey of self-confidence and being able to take on bigger and bigger boats.
Sure, we'll go with that. And on that note, we're going to explore more of that next episode. And until then,
Write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.